The most feared businessman in the United States, Arthur Sterling, was on his knees, begging for a miracle in his son Leo's room. The boy was in a coma, unresponsive, surrounded by machines and hopeless diagnoses. It was then that an unknown girl, named Maya, burst into the Chicago Memorial Hospital and said, "Turn off the machines. If this beautiful story of perseverance and love has interested you." The silence in the hallways of Mercy General Hospital seemed to scream louder than any machine. Edward Sterling, a 47-year-old man accustomed to commanding boardrooms with a firm hand, was kneeling there beside a hospital bed, reduced to a version of himself he didn't even recognize. His hands trembled as they delicately touched the fingers of his son, Michael, only 8 years old, who for 3 weeks had been breathing through tubes and wires. The pediatric ICU of Chicago's most expensive hospital had become his second home. Edward spent his days watching the boy's chest rise and fall to the artificial rhythm of the machines. The numbers on the heart monitor flashed in a mesmerizing dance that he had memorized as if it were a prayer. 62 beats per minute, stable blood pressure, oxygen saturation at 98%, numbers that signified life but did not signify hope. Michael had arrived at the hospital in critical condition after collapsing at home during dinner. What had begun months earlier as simple fatigue had transformed into something much more serious. Tests revealed a rare blood condition that the doctors explained in technical terms Edward pretended to understand. The treatment had been rigorous, absolute. Rest, expensive medications imported from Europe, and constant care that his wife Isabel supervised personally. But nothing worked. With each passing day, Michael grew paler, weaker, more distant. Until that fateful September afternoon, the boy simply collapsed in front of everyone, his eyes rolling back before his small body hit the cold floor of the dining room. Isabel Sterling, Edward's second wife, had proven to be a pillar of strength throughout the crisis. At 35, she possessed a serene beauty that perfectly matched her maternal dedication to Michael. Since entering their lives 3 years earlier, shortly after the loss of Edward's first wife in a car accident, Isabel had dedicated herself entirely to the boy's care. She organized the medication schedules, accompanied every medical appointment, and ensured that Michael followed every doctor's recommendation to the letter. Dr. Henry Maxwell, a longtime friend of Edward and the family's private physician, had also shown himself to be tireless in his care. The 52-year-old man, with his gold-rimmed glasses and always impeccable suits, visited Michael daily, adjusting dosages and monitoring every small change in his clinical picture. Henry had known Edward since college, had been the best man at his first wedding, and now dedicated himself as if Michael were his own son. But all that dedication seemed insufficient in the face of the cruel reality that the hospital's specialists had communicated the previous morning. Michael's coma was irreversible. The neurological damage caused by the blood condition was permanent. The only options were to keep the machines running indefinitely or to make the most painful decision any parent could face. Edward rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the weight of 48 hours without sleep. His company, Sterling Developments, one of the largest construction firms in the country, was being managed by his team while he remained in that sterile room. $1 million contracts awaited his signature. Important meetings had been cancelled, but none of that mattered. His fortune, built over 20 years of hard work, could not buy what he desired most: to see Michael's brown eyes open again. Isabel entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, her heels echoing softly on the hospital floor. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and even after days of vigil, she maintained the composure that had always characterized her presence. "Edward, you need to rest," she said in a soft voice, placing one of the cups on the small table beside the bed. "It's almost 4 in the afternoon and you haven't eaten anything today." Edward shook his head without taking his eyes off his son. "I can't. What if he wakes up and I'm not here?" Isabel approached and placed her hand on her husband's shoulder. "The doctors were clear about the situation. Henry talked to me a little while ago and said it might be time for us to consider—" "No," Edward interrupted her firmly. "Not yet. I need more time to think." It was then that a strange, Noise echoed through the hospital corridor. Shouts from staff, running footsteps, raised voices arguing about something regarding security. Edward raised his head, frowning. "What's going on out there?" he murmured, still holding Michael's hand. Isabel walked to the door and peered through the glass. "It looks like some kind of commotion, probably an agitated patient or an out-of-control family. You know how hospitals can be." But the noises were getting closer. Voices of security guards asking someone to stop, the sound of something being dragged, and then suddenly the door to the room burst open. A small, thin girl, in dirty and torn clothes, with messy brown hair and dark eyes full of determination, burst into the sterile environment. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, but there was something in her posture that conveyed a courage incompatible with her age. Her bare feet left small marks of dirt on the clean floor as she walked directly toward Michael's bed. "Stop right there!" Isabel shouted, positioning herself between the girl and the bed. "How did you get in here? Security! Security!" But the girl completely ignored Isabel and fixed her eyes directly on Edward, who remained kneeling by. The bed, paralyzed by surprise. Without hesitating, without showing fear or uncertainty, she spoke in a clear, firm voice that echoed through the room like a bell. "You can turn off the machines. He will wake up." The silence that followed was so profound that even the sound of the machine seemed to cease for a moment. The girl's sentence echoed through the room like silent thunder. Edward felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. The words were impossible, absurd, but there was something in the way she pronounced them that made his heart race in a way he couldn't explain. "What did you say?" Edward whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Before the girl could answer, 2 hospital security guards came running into the room, clearly out of breath. The first, a tall and burly man named Carl, immediately headed toward the child. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling. She managed to slip past us at the elevator. We don't know how she got past the front desk," Carl said, reaching out toward the girl. "Come on, kid. You can't be in here." "Don't touch her yet," Edward said, raising his hand. Something inside him, an intuition he couldn't explain, made him want to hear more. "How do you know about my son?" The girl stood her ground more firmly, crossing her thin arms over her chest. Her clothes were clearly second-hand, a faded t-shirt with drawings that could no longer be identified, patched jeans and worn-out sneakers with holes that let her toes peek out, but her eyes shone with a determination that contrasted with her fragile appearance. "I'm his friend," she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "My name is Luna Rivers and I'm 9 years old. Michael told me about you, about your company, about how you build huge buildings." Isabel stepped forward, her expression oscillating between incredulity and irritation. "This is ridiculous. Michael has been hospitalized for weeks, and before that he was at home, resting. How could a street child know him?" Luna turned to face Isabel with surprising courage. "I'm not a street child. I live at St. Jude's Children's Home on Flower Street, and I met Michael 2 months ago, when my ball fell into your backyard." Edward frowned. The family mansion was in an upscale neighborhood, surrounded by high walls and a security system. How could a ball have fallen inside? "Go on," Edward said, ignoring Isabel's disapproving look. Luna took a deep breath, as if organizing her memories. "I was playing in the small park next to your house. The ball bounced really high and fell into the garden. I climbed the wall to get it back, but then I saw Michael sitting alone on the back porch. He looked very sad." The description matched Edward's memories. In recent months, Michael spent hours on the back porch, watching the garden while following medical rest recommendations. Edward had always thought his son was just resting, but perhaps he was feeling lonely. "Michael saw me and waved," Luna continued, her voice softening. "I asked if I could get my ball, and he said yes. Then we started talking. He said he was sick and couldn't play much, but that he liked it when I showed up." "This is impossible," Isabel interrupted, her voice now louder. "I was always with Michael. He never mentioned any friend." Luna looked directly at Isabel with an expression Edward couldn't decipher. There was something there, a tension that seemed to come from a very deep place. "Michael said he had to keep it a secret," Luna replied calmly. "He said you would be mad if you found out." At that moment, Dr. Henry Maxwell entered the room, carrying a clipboard with medical papers. His gold glasses reflected the hospital's fluorescent lights as he observed the scene, the guards on alert, Isabel with a tense expression, Edward kneeling by the bed, and a dirty girl in the middle of it all. "What is going on here?" Dr. Henry asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling situations. "This girl broke into the room and is claiming she knows." "Michael," Isabel explained quickly. "She also said something completely absurd about turning off the machines." Dr. Henry directed his gaze toward Luna, and Edward noticed a subtle change in his expression. For a brief moment, there seemed to be recognition in his eyes, but the expression soon returned to its usual professionalism. "Child, you shouldn't be here," the doctor said firmly. "This is a restricted hospital environment, and the patient is in critical condition. Your presence could compromise the treatment." Luna was not intimidated. "I know Michael is being poisoned." The words dropped like a bomb in the room. Edward felt his blood run cold. Isabel turned pale, and Dr. Henry let the clipboard fall to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. "What did you just say?" Edward asked, his voice coming out as a whisper. "Michael is being poisoned," Luna repeated, now looking directly at Edward. "I saw it, I heard it. That's why he isn't getting better, even with all the medicine, and that's why he will wake up if you turn off the machines, because then they stop giving him the poison." Dr. Henry quickly regained his composure and turned to the guards. "Call the hospital social worker, immediately. This child clearly has mental issues and needs a psychiatric evaluation. Her fantasies could be dangerous." "They aren't fantasies," Luna shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "I heard you talking. I saw when you put strange things in his IV." Edward stood up slowly, his gaze alternating between Luna, Isabel, and Dr. Henry. His mind began to process the girl's words, connecting them to small details he had observed but ignored in recent months. Michael's gradual decline despite the treatments, Isabel's insistence that he not participate directly in the medical care, Dr. Henry's constant visits, always with new medications. "Luna," Edward said, his voice trembling slightly, "you need to tell me exactly what you saw and heard." "Edward," Isabel interrupted, positioning herself between him and the girl. "You can't be taking this seriously. This child clearly has problems. She could be under the influence of drugs or have some mental disorder." But Luna managed to sidestep Isabel and approached Edward. "Michael told me the medicines made him feel worse. He said that when he took them he got a lot of stomach pain and dizziness, but when I asked why he didn't tell you that, he said he was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Edward asked, his heart beating faster and faster. Luna looked at Isabel and then at Dr. Henry before answering, "Afraid that you would find out the truth, and they would hurt you too." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the sound of the machines keeping Michael alive. Edward watched his wife's face and his doctor friend's face, looking for signs, expressions, anything that could confirm or deny the impossible accusations he had just heard. It was then that Luna did something no one expected. She went directly to the bed where Michael was, hospitalized, and, ignoring all the protests around her, delicately held the boy's hand. "Michael," she whispered, "I promised I would save you, and I will." At that moment, something completely unexpected happened. Michael's fingers, motionless for weeks, twitched slightly. The almost imperceptible movement of Michael's fingers caused everyone in the room to freeze. Edward felt his heart stop for an instant before racing violently. It was his son's first response in 3 weeks. "Did you see that?" Edward whispered, his eyes fixed on Michael's hand. He moved. Dr. Henry immediately approached the bed, firmly pushing Luna aside and checking the monitors. "It could just be involuntary reflexes," he said, but Edward noticed a tension in his voice he had never noticed before. "It's common in long-term coma patients." Luna stood beside Edward, unintimidated by the doctor's presence. "It's not a reflex. He's trying to wake up, but he can't because of the drugs you're giving him." Isabel approached quickly, her face showing a mix of hope and anxiety. "Michael, my love, can you hear me?" she whispered, delicately touching the boy's arm. But this time, when Isabel touched Michael, there was no reaction. only when Luna held his hand again. Did the boy's fingers contract once more pronounced this time? Edward observed the difference with growing unease. Why did Michael react only to Luna's touch? That's strange, Edward murmured, more to himself than to the others. Dr. Henry quickly intervened, checking the machines and making notes. The brain in a coma state can react unpredictably to different stimuli. We shouldn't interpret these reactions as signs of consciousness. Luna turned to Edward with urgency in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, you need to know the truth. 2 weeks ago I was hiding in your garden waiting to see Michael when I heard a conversation. Luna, that's enough, Dr. Henry interrupted with authority. Your childhood fantasies are causing unnecessary suffering to this family. But Edward raised his hand, silencing the doctor. Let her speak. I want to hear everything. Luna took a deep breath and continued, her voice gaining confidence. I was hiding behind the roses, near the kitchen window. It was at night, and I heard Mrs. Isabel talking on the phone with someone. Isabel became visibly tense. Edward, you can't be believing this. It's a disturbed child making up stories. What did you hear exactly? Edward asked, ignoring his wife. She was talking about increasing the dosage of something, Luna continued, her eyes never leaving Edward's face. She said it was taking too long and that she needed to speed up the process. Then she talked about papers, about transferring things into her name. Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. In recent months, Isabel had suggested several times that he transfer some properties into her name, citing tax planning issues. At the time, he had agreed, completely trusting her dedication to the family. This is madness, Isabel protested, her voice rising in pitch. Edward, how can you give credit to the words of a street girl who clearly has mental problems? Dr. Henry approached Edward, placing a hand on his shoulder paternally. Edward, my friend, you are going through a moment of extreme emotional stress. It's natural to want to cling to any hope, however absurd. But these accusations are dangerous and could disrupt the little peace we have left. Edward watched the face of his longtime friend, looking for signs of the honesty he had always known. But there was something different there, a tension he couldn't identify. Luna stepped closer to Edward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Mr. Sterling, you need to check the medicines they are giving Michael. Michael told me the new medicines tasted bitter and made him feel very sick. He said that before he got very ill, he tried to throw the medicines away, but they always found out. Edward felt a vague memory surfacing in his mind. A few weeks before Michael collapsed, he had found pills in the trash in the boys' bathroom. At the time, Isabel explained that Michael was having difficulty swallowing the medications and sometimes spat them out, so she had started supervising him more closely during medication. Michael threw the medicines away? Edward asked, his voice trembling. He tried, Luna confirmed. But then they started dissolving the pills in his food. Michael told me the food tasted strange, but when he complained, they said it was because of his illness. Edward remembered how Michael had lost his appetite drastically in recent months. Isabel always explained it was a symptom of the blood condition, and Dr. Henry confirmed it, suggesting nutritional supplements that were mixed into Michael's juices. Where is Michael now? Luna asked suddenly, looking around the room. I mean, where is his consciousness? The question took everyone by surprise. Dr. Henry frowned. What do you mean by that, child? Luna looked directly at Michael, still holding his hand. Michael taught me a game. We imagined we were explorers trapped in a dark cave, and we had to find a way out. He always said that even in the dark, if you paid attention, you could hear voices of people who loved you calling you home. Edward felt tears forming in his eyes. It was exactly the kind of imaginative game Michael loved. The boy always had a vibrant imagination and liked creating elaborate stories. Michael is in the dark cave now, Luna continued, her voice soft but determined. But he can hear our voices. He's trying to come back, but something is stopping him, like there's a wall between him and the exit. Dr. Henry cleared his throat impatiently. Edward, this has gone too far. This child clearly has serious psychological problems and is manipulating your emotions in a moment of vulnerability. But Edward was watching Michael closely. When Luna spoke about the cave and hearing voices, he was certain he saw the boy's eyelids flicker slightly. Henry, Edward, said slowly, "what exactly are the medications Michael is receiving now?" The doctor seemed slightly uncomfortable with the question. "He is receiving a cocktail of medications to stabilize his blood condition, plus sedatives to keep him comfortable during the coma." "Sedatives?" Edward asked, frowning. "Since when do coma patients need sedatives?" Dr. Henry hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "In cases like Michael's, where there is underlying neurological agitation, sedatives help prevent potential seizures." Luna squeezed Michael's hand and whispered, "Michael, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." This time, the response was undeniable. Michael's fingers closed around Luna's hand with enough force for everyone in the room to see. Isabel took a step back, her face paling visibly. Dr. Henry quickly moved to check the monitors, his breathing rapid. Edward stood up slowly, a new determination growing in his chest. "Henry, I want a second medical opinion. I want another neurologist to examine Michael." "Edward, that's not necessary," Dr. Henry replied quickly. "I know Michael's case better than any other doctor. A second opinion would only cause confusion and could compromise the treatment." "No," Edward said firmly, an authority he hadn't shown in a long time entering his voice. "I want another doctor, and I want to see all of Michael's medical records from the last 6 months." Isabel approached him, placing her hand on his arm. "Edward, honey, you're being influenced by this child's fantasies. Henry has been our friend for years. How can you doubt him?" Edward looked at his wife, then at Dr. Henry, and finally at Luna, who was still holding Michael's hand. The girl stared at him with an expression that mixed courage and hope. "Because," Edward said slowly, "for the first time in months someone is giving me answers. That makes sense." It was then that Luna did something that surprised everyone. She turned toward the monitors controlling Michael's intravenous medication and, before anyone could stop her, disconnected one of the tubes. The monitor's alarm went off immediately, filling the room with a shrill sound that echoed through the hospital corridors. Dr. Henry lunged toward the equipment, his face contorted in panic. "You don't know what you're doing," the doctor shouted, pushing Luna away from the machines while trying to reconnect the tube. "You're putting his life at risk." Edward observed the doctor's excessive reaction with growing suspicion. In all their years of friendship, he had never seen Henry lose his composure like this. An experienced doctor should react with professional calm to an emergency, not with desperation. Nurses rushed into the room, drawn by the alarm. The head nurse, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, immediately began checking Michael's vital signs. "What happened here?" Sarah asked, her voice professional but concerned. "This child disconnected the patient's medication," Dr. Henry explained, still trying to stabilize the equipment. "We need to restore the protocol immediately." But Edward stepped between the doctor and the bed. "Wait, I want to know exactly what medication was being administered through that tube." Dr. Henry stopped and stared at him with incredulity. "Edward, we don't have time for questions. Every second without medication could be crucial." "Then explain to me quickly what medication this is," Edward insisted, crossing his arms. Luna took advantage of the adult's distraction to approach Michael again. This time she placed both hands on the boy's cheeks and whispered, "Michael, I know you can hear me. You need to fight to come back. Your father is here and he's starting to find out the truth." To everyone's amazement, Michael emitted a low, almost inaudible sound. They weren't words, but it was clearly an attempt at communication. Isabel, who had remained silent watching the situation unfold, suddenly exploded. "Enough! Edward, get this girl out of here right now. She is disturbing Michael and interfering with his medical treatment." The intensity of Isabel's reaction made Edward take a step back. In 3 years of marriage, he had never seen his wife lose control like this. She had always been calm, controlled, almost serene in her way of handling crises. "Why are you so upset?" Edward asked, studying Isabel's face. "Because an unknown child broke into the hospital, is making insane accusations against me and Henry, and now is interfering with my stepson's medical treatment," Isabel replied, her voice trembling with emotion. Luna turned to face Isabel, her small eyes shining with fierce determination. Michael told me you always get mad when he doesn't take his medicine. He said you make a very ugly face and yell at him." "That's a lie," Isabel screamed, taking a step toward Luna. Edward placed himself protectively between his wife and the girl. For the first time, he was seeing Isabel through different eyes, and what he saw disturbed him deeply. "Isabel, calm down," Edward said, his voice carrying an authority she wasn't used to hearing from him. Nurse Sarah, who had been watching the exchange of accusations with growing concern, approached Edward. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps it's best we continue this conversation in a more private setting. The patient needs peace." "No," Luna said firmly, still holding Michael's face. "I can't leave him alone with them. They'll put more poison in him." Dr. Henry sighed deeply, as if struggling to maintain his patience. "Edward, as a doctor and your friend, I implore you to be rational. This child clearly has serious psychiatric problems. Her fantasies about poisoning are typical delusions of certain childhood mental conditions." Edward looked at the doctor, then at his wife, and finally at Luna, who continued whispering encouragement to Michael. There was something in the girl's dedication, in the way she touched Michael's face with such care, that contrasted drastically with the palpable tension of the adults around her. "Sarah," Edward addressed the head nurse, "how long has Michael been without that specific medication?" Sarah consulted her watch. "About 5 minutes, Mr. Sterling." "And what is the exact name of that medication?" Dr. Henry interrupted, before Sarah could answer. "Edward, this information is confidential and technical. It's not appropriate to discuss it in front of unauthorized people." "Unauthorized people?" Edward repeated, his voice low but dangerous. "I am the patient's father. I have the right to know everything about my son's treatment." Nurse Sarah looked nervously between Edward and Dr. Henry. "The medication is a long-acting sedative, Mr. Sterling. It is administered to keep the patient in an induced coma." Edward felt his blood run cold. "Induced coma? Henry, you told me Michael's coma was natural, the result of the blood condition." Dr. Henry opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly searching for an explanation. "Edward, there are technical aspects of the treatment that are difficult to explain to lay people. The induced coma is a protective measure for the brain." "Protection against what?" Edward asked, his voice rising in volume. Luna took advantage of the distraction to whisper more urgently to Michael. "Michael, if you can hear me, move your fingers. Just a little. Your father needs to see." This time not only did Michael's fingers move, but he managed to open his eyes slightly. It was just a slit, but enough for everyone in the room to see. Nurse Sarah gave a small gasp of surprise. "Dr. Henry, the patient is showing signs of consciousness." Dr. Henry quickly moved to check Michael, but Edward stopped him, placing a firm hand on his chest. "No," Edward said with a determination that surprised even himself. "I want another doctor here now." "Edward, you're making a terrible mistake," Isabel said, her voice now in a pleading tone. "Henry knows Michael's case better than any other doctor. You're risking our son's life." "Our son?" Edward repeated, the words coming out sharper than he intended. "Michael isn't your biological son, Isabel." The comment hit Isabel like a slap. Her face turned pale, and for a moment Edward saw something in her eyes he had never noticed before. A coldness that didn't match the maternal image she had always projected. Luna continued whispering to Michael, and now the boy was managing to keep his eyes slightly open. His mouth moved as if he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. "Michael is trying to say something," Luna announced, leaning her ear close to the boy's mouth. Dr. Henry headed quickly for the room's telephone. "I need to call other doctors to evaluate the patient's current neurological status." "Good idea," Edward agreed. "Call Dr. Robert Sullivan, the neurologist from Northwestern Memorial. I want an independent second opinion." Edward saw Dr. Henry hesitate for a moment before dialing. That hesitation, however brief, was enough to confirm his growing suspicions. Meanwhile, Luna continued talking softly to Michael, telling him how she had climbed the hospital wall, how she had lied to the guards, saying she was a patient's daughter, how she had run through the halls looking for him. "I promised I was going to save you, Michael," she whispered, "and I always keep my promises." It was then that Michael, with a visible effort, managed to whisper a single word. Luna. The silence that followed was profound. It was the first word Michael had spoken in 3 weeks. Edward felt tears streaming down his face. His son had recognized the girl. He had confirmed that they really knew each other. Isabel and Dr. Henry exchanged a quick look that Edward intercepted. There was communication in that look, something they were sharing without words. At that moment, Edward made a decision that would change everything. "Sarah," he addressed the head, "Nurse, I want you to officially document that I am taking full responsibility for my son's medical treatment, and I want all medication suspended until an independent neurologist examines Michael." "Edward, this is madness," Dr. Henry protested. "You're putting his life in danger." "No," Edward replied, looking directly at Luna and Michael. "I think I'm finally saving his life." It was then that Michael, gathering all his strength, whispered one more word that made Edward's heart stop. "Daddy." The word "Daddy" coming from Michael's lips echoed through the room like a prayer answered. Edward knelt beside the bed, his hands trembling as he delicately touched his son's face. "Michael, my son, I'm here," Edward whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Daddy is here and won't let anything bad happen to you." Michael's eyes, though still heavy and confused, focused on his father's face. There was recognition there, a connection that had been lost for weeks. Luna remained on the opposite side of the bed, holding the boy's hand and smiling through tears she tried to hide. Dr. Henry approached with a syringe in hand. "Edward, I need to administer a mild sedative so Michael doesn't get too agitated." Abruptly waking from a coma can be dangerous. "Stop right there," Edward said firmly, blocking the doctor's path. "You're not administering anything to my son until another doctor examines that medication." "Edward, you're being irrational," Isabel intervened, her voice laden with a tension she tried to disguise as concern. "Henry knows what's best for Michael. You don't have the medical knowledge to make these decisions." Michael tried to speak again, his voice weak but audible. "Dad, medicine, bad." The boy's words fell like a bomb in the room. Edward felt a cold fury growing in his chest. His son was trying to communicate something about the medication, confirming the suspicions Luna had planted. "What are you trying to tell me, Michael?" Edward asked, leaning his ear close to the boy's mouth. "Bitter, taste, stomach hurts," Michael managed to whisper between labored breaths. Dr. Henry quickly interrupted. "Edward, he's confused. Patients coming out of a coma frequently have hallucinations and distorted memories. We shouldn't give credit to these reports." But Luna leaned over Michael and whispered, "Michael, tell your father about the medicines Isabel mixed into the food." Michael nodded slightly and, gathering strength, whispered, "Isabel, put white powder in the juice. I didn't want it. She made me." Isabel turned visibly pale. "Edward, he's delirious. How can you believe the words of a child who just woke up from a coma?" Edward stood up slowly, his gaze alternating between his wife and the doctor. "Nurse Sarah, I want you to bring all of Michael's medical records from the last 6 months. Now." "Edward, that's not necessary," Dr. Henry protested, but there was sweat forming on his forehead. "It is very necessary," Edward replied, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in business meetings. "I want to see every medication prescribed, every dosage, every change in treatment." Nurse Sarah looked nervously at Dr. Henry before answering. "Mr. Sterling, I'll get the records, but I need the authorization of the physician in charge." "I am the legal guardian for the patient," Edward declared. "Henry, do you authorize me to see the records, or do I need to involve the hospital's legal department?" Dr. Henry hesitated visually before nodding reluctantly. "Of course, Edward. You have the right to your son's medical records." While Sarah went to get the documents, Luna continued talking softly to Michael, helping him stay conscious. "Michael, do you remember when I told you about the home where I live? You said you wanted to visit me." Michael smiled faintly. "I remember. You... true friend." Edward watched the interaction between the two children, seeing a genuine connection that couldn't be faked. Luna treated Michael with a protective affection that contrasted drastically with the tension emanating from the adults around her. Isabel approached Edward, placing her hand on his arm. "Edward, honey, I know you're confused and desperate, but you can't let a disturbed child destroy our family. Michael needs proper medical care, not childhood fantasies." Edward looked at his wife, studying her face. For the first time in 3 years, he was truly observing Isabel, beyond the mask of perfection she always maintained. There was something calculated in her expression, a coldness he had never noticed. "Isabel," Edward said calmly, "what hospital did you say you worked at before we met?" The question seemed to catch Isabel by surprise. "Mercy Central. Why are you asking that now? And what was your role there?" Isabel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I was an administrative assistant in the pediatric ward." Edward nodded, but there was something in the answer that didn't sound natural. He had never deeply investigated Isabel's professional past, trusting the information she had provided. Nurse Sarah returned with a thick folder of documents. "Here are all of Michael's medical records from the last 6 months, Mr. Sterling." Edward took the folder and began examining the papers. His engineering background had taught him to analyze data and identify patterns, and what he saw in the medical records disturbed him. "Henry," Edward said, his voice taking on a dangerous tone, "why was Michael receiving progressively larger doses of sedatives over the last 3 months?" Dr. Henry cleared his throat, nervously. "As I explained before, Michael presented neurological agitation that required adjustments in medication. But here it says the sedatives were started even before the neurological symptoms appeared," Edward continued, pointing to specific dates in the documents. "In fact, the sedatives started 2 weeks after Isabel suggested I transfer some properties into her name." The silence that followed was tense and heavy. Isabel and Dr. Henry exchanged another quick look, and Edward intercepted the non-verbal communication between them. Luna, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke. "Mr. Sterling, I know where they kept the poison." Everyone turned to look at the girl. Dr. Henry seemed particularly alarmed by the statement. "What do you mean, Luna?" Edward asked, keeping his voice calm despite the emotional storm he felt. "On the night I heard them talking, I saw Mrs. Isabel take a small bottle from a purse. It was a white powder, and she told Dr. Henry it was working better than they expected." Edward turned his attention back to the medical records, looking for medications that might match Luna's description. He found several prescriptions for powdered vitamin supplements that were supposed to be mixed into Michael's food. "Henry," Edward said, his voice low but laden with threat, "these vitamin supplements you prescribed for Michael, where exactly did you acquire them?" Dr. Henry began to sweat visibly. "They are specialized imported supplements, very effective for rare blood conditions." "And do you have the original bottles, with the laboratory labels?" The doctor's hesitation was enough to confirm Edward's suspicions. "Edward, why this interrogation? You're acting as if I were a criminal." "Maybe," Edward said, closing the medical records folder. "It's because I'm starting to believe you are." Michael, who had been listening with growing mental clarity, whispered, "Dad, they wanted me to sleep forever." The boy's innocent confession was like a punch to Edward's stomach. His 8-year-old son had understood on some level that he was being harmed by the people who were supposedly caring for him. Isabel finally lost the composure she had tried to maintain. "Edward, this has gone beyond all limits. You're believing the fantasies of a traumatized child and Michael's hallucinations. How can you destroy our family this way?" "Our family," Edward repeated, his voice laden with a bitterness that surprised even himself. "Isabel, our family has been being destroyed for months. The difference is that now I know by whom." Dr. Henry headed for the room's door. "Edward, I need to consult other doctors about Michael's current neurological condition. The accusations being made here are serious and need to be investigated properly." "I completely agree," Edward said, blocking the doctor's path. "But you're not leaving this room until you explain exactly what you were administering to my son." It was then that Luna did something no one expected. She stood up from the chair beside Michael and walked toward Isabel's purse, which was on a chair in the corner of the room. "Luna, what are you doing?" Edward asked. "Looking for the poison," Luna replied simply, opening Isabel's purse. "Get your hands off my purse right now," Isabel screamed, lunging toward Luna with an aggressiveness that surprised everyone in the room. Edward quickly intercepted his wife, holding her by the arms. "Isabel, if you have nothing to hide, why are you reacting this way?" "Because a delinquent child is going through my personal belongings," Isabel replied, struggling to free herself from Edward's grip. "This is an invasion of privacy." Luna completely ignored the adult's commotion and continued examining the contents of the purse with the determination of an experienced detective. Her small hands searched methodically through the items, wallet, phone, makeup, tissues, until her fingers touched something different. "Found it," Luna announced, pulling a small glass vial with a silver cap from the purse. The label was partially removed, but it was still possible to read some words in English. Edward let go of Isabel and approached Luna, reaching out his hand. "Let me see that." Luna handed the vial to Edward, who examined it carefully. It was a professional medical container, the type used for controlled substances. The liquid inside was colorless, but there was a white residue at the bottom that confirmed Luna's description of the powder. "Henry," Edward said, his voice dangerously calm, "can you explain to me why my wife has a bottle of medication without a full label in her purse?" Dr. Henry tried to step closer to examine the vial, but Edward kept him at a distance. "Edward, let me see. It could just be some personal medication of Isabel's." "It's not mine," Isabel protested quickly, but soon realized the error of her statement. "I mean, I don't know how that got into my purse." Edward looked fixedly at his wife. "I just said it isn't yours, but a few seconds ago you were furious because Luna was touching your personal belongings. Which of the two versions is the truth?" Michael, who had been watching the scene with growing mental clarity, whispered, "Dad, that bottle, Isabel, put it in my juice every night." The boy's statement was like a confession that couldn't be ignored or explained. Edward felt a cold rage taking over him, an emotion more intense than anything he had experienced in his business life. Nurse Sarah, who had been watching the situation with growing alarm, approached Edward. "Mr. Sterling, I think we should call hospital security and possibly the administration. This situation is getting out of medical control." "Good idea," Edward agreed, "but I also want you to call the hospital's medical board. I want this vial analyzed immediately in a lab." Dr. Henry took a step forward, his mask of professionalism finally slipping. "Edward, you're making a grave mistake. You're destroying years of relationships based on the words of a traumatized child." "Traumatized by whom, Henry?" Edward asked, his voice laden with a contained threat. "By you and my wife." Luna took advantage of the adult's distraction to approach Michael again. The boy was visibly more alert, his eyes following the conversations around him with growing understanding. "Michael," Luna whispered, "do you remember anything else about the medicines? Any detail could help your father." Michael nodded slightly, and with effort managed to speak more clearly. "They always gave me medicine when Daddy wasn't home. Isabel said it was our secret." Edward felt as if he had been punched. In recent months, he had worked long hours, frequently coming home after Michael was already asleep. He had completely trusted Isabel to care for the boy during his absences. "What other secrets did Isabel ask you to keep?" Edward asked, kneeling beside the bed. Michael looked nervously at Isabel before answering. "She said that if I told about the medicines, you would be mad at me. She said you were going to send me away." Edward felt tears forming in his eyes. His 8-year-old son had been psychologically manipulated, in addition to being physically poisoned. "Michael, I would never send you away. You are my son, and I love you more than anything in the world." Isabel, realizing her position was becoming untenable, changed strategy. "Edward, if this vial really contains something harmful, then someone must have put it in my purse to frame me. Maybe this girl— Don't try to pin the blame on Luna, Edward interrupted her. She was the only honest person in this room. Dr. Henry headed for the room's telephone. Edward, I need to make some calls. Michael's medical situation requires specialized evaluation. No, Edward said firmly, blocking access to the phone. You're not making any calls. I want you to stay here until the hospital administration arrives. Luna, who had been watching everyone's reactions closely, suddenly spoke. Mr. Sterling, there's something else you need to know. Everyone turned to look at the girl. There was something in her expression indicating she had even more important information to reveal. What else, Luna? Edward asked, mentally preparing himself for another shocking revelation. It's not just Michael, Luna said, her voice small but determined. I heard them talking about other plans. About you too. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. Plans about me? Luna nodded gravely. Mrs. Isabel told Dr. Henry that after Michael died, you would be so sad that she could make you sign anything. She said she had already prepared papers to transfer your whole company into her name. The revelation dropped like a nuclear bomb in the room. Edward looked at Isabel, who had turned completely pale. It was as if all the pieces of a sinister puzzle were finally fitting together. Isabel, Edward said, his voice taking on a tone she had never heard from him before. Where are those papers? Isabel tried to retreat, but Edward caught her by the wrist. Edward, you're hurting my arm. Let me go. Where are the papers? Edward repeated, slightly increasing the pressure. Dr. Henry tried to intervene. Edward, you're losing control. Let go of Isabel and let's talk calmly. Calmly? Edward laughed bitterly. My wife and my best friend were poisoning my son to rob me, and you want me to be calm? Michael, watching the growing tension, gathered strength to speak. Dad, there's one more thing. I heard Isabel talking about your first wife. Edward stopped immediately, the blood freezing in his veins. His first wife had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, shortly after he met Isabel. The accident had always puzzled him because his wife was an extremely careful driver. What did you hear about my first wife, Michael? Edward asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Michael looked at Isabel, who was now visibly trembling, before continuing. Isabel said she knew how to make accidents look natural. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward looked at Isabel with a terrible understanding growing in his mind. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about Michael. It was about a much more sinister and calculated pattern. You met my first wife before the accident, Edward said, not as a question but as a statement. You planned everything from the beginning. Isabel tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. Dr. Henry headed quickly for the door, but Edward was faster. No one leaves this room, Edward said with an authority that made everyone stop. Sarah, call hospital security now and call the administration and— Edward hesitated for a moment, making a decision that would change everything. Call the police. The word police echoed through the room like a gunshot. Isabel turned visibly pale, and Dr. Henry began to sweat profusely, his eyes darting quickly between Edward and the door. Edward, you're making a terrible mistake, Dr. Henry said, his voice trembling slightly. Calling. The police will create an unnecessary scandal. We can resolve this internally. Resolve what internally? Edward asked, his voice laden with a controlled fury. The poisoning of my son? The attempt to steal my company? The possible involvement in my first wife's accident? Nurse Sarah, clearly disturbed by the whole situation, picked up the phone with shaking hands. Mr. Sterling, are you sure you want me to call the police? Once they get here, the situation will be out of everyone's control. Call them, Edward said firmly. And also call the hospital's medical director. I want this vial analyzed immediately. Isabel suddenly burst into tears, a dramatic transformation from the controlled woman she had been minutes earlier. Edward, please, you have to listen to me. I would never hurt Michael. He is like a son to me. Stop lying, Luna shouted, surprising everyone with the strength of her voice. I heard you. I saw you putting poison in his food. Michael, who was gradually recovering from the sedation, managed to speak with more clarity. Dad, Isabel, never hugged me like a real mother would. She only pretended when you were looking. Michael's innocent observation hit Edward like lightning. He began to remember small details he had ignored. How Isabel always pulled away from Michael when she thought no one was watching. How she never showed genuine affection for the boy. How her displays of maternal love always seemed staged. Dr. Henry tried one last strategy. Edward, even if there were some misunderstanding with Michael's medication, you need to think about the legal consequences. Isabel is your wife. Do you really want to destroy your family because of the words of a street child? Luna is not a street child, Edward said, looking protectively at the girl. She is a hero. Who saved my son's life? Luna blushed at the compliment, but kept her focus on Michael. Michael, are you feeling better? Your eyes are brighter. Michael smiled faintly at his friend. I'm feeling more awake, like the fog is lifting. Edward observed his son with growing emotion. With every passing minute, Michael seemed more alert, more present. It was as if a curtain were being gradually raised. The room door opened, and 2 hospital security guards entered, followed by a middle-aged man in a dark suit whom Edward recognized as Dr. Richard Montgomery, the hospital's medical director. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Bewam, Montgomery said, his voice professional but concerned. We received a report of an unusual situation in this room. Can you explain to me what is happening? Edward stood up, still holding the vial Luna had found. Dr. Montgomery, I believe my son has been deliberately poisoned by my wife and Dr. Henry Maxwell. I want this vial analyzed immediately and all of Michael's medical records reviewed by an independent team. Dr. Montgomery looked around the room, observing the palpable tension among those present. His eyes fixed on Michael, who was visibly more conscious than he had been in weeks. Michael is showing signs of recovery, Dr. Montgomery asked, approaching the bed. Yes, Edward confirmed. He started waking up shortly after we suspended the medication being administered through the IV drip. Dr. Montgomery frowned and turned to Dr. Henry. Henry, can you explain the medical protocol being followed for this patient? Dr. Henry hesitated visibly before answering. Richard, this is a complex case of a coma resulting from a rare blood condition. The treatment I established is based on international protocols. What blood condition specifically? Dr. Montgomery asked, consulting the medical clipboard he had brought. The question seemed to catch Dr. Henry off guard. He stuttered for a moment before mentioning a complex medical name Edward couldn't understand. Luna, who had been watching the entire conversation intently, suddenly spoke. Dr. Montgomery, can you check if Michael really has that blood disease? Because I think they made it up. Dr. Montgomery looked surprised at the girl. Who are you, child? My name is Luna Rivers, and I'm Michael's friend. I discovered they were poisoning him. Dr. Montgomery turned to Edward with a questioning look. Edward nodded. Dr. Montgomery, this girl was the one who alerted me to what was happening. Everything she has said so far has proven to be true. I see, Dr. Montgomery said, making notes. I will order a full analysis of Michael's blood and this vial you mentioned. I will also review all the medical records. Isabel, who had remained silent for a few minutes, suddenly headed for the door. I need to get out of here. I can't stay here listening to these absurd accusations. One of the guards blocked her exit. Ma'am, the medical director requested that everyone remain here until the situation is clarified. You can't keep me here against my will, Isabel protested, her mask of composure finally falling completely. Dr. Montgomery observed Isabel's reaction with interest. Mrs. Sterling, if there is nothing to hide, why the urgency to leave? Michael, who had been listening intently, gathered strength to speak. Dr. Montgomery, I tell you something about the medicine that they gave me? Of course, Michael, Dr. Montgomery said, approaching the bed. Tell me everything you remember. Michael took a deep breath, and with increasing clarity began to describe the last few months, how the medicines tasted bitter, how he felt nauseous after taking them, how Isabel insisted he take them even when he complained of stomach pain, how she mixed strange powders into his food. As Michael spoke, Dr. Montgomery made detailed notes. Edward watched his wife's face and Dr. Henry's face, seeing growing signs of despair in both. "Dr. Montgomery," Edward said, "there is something else you need to know. Michael overheard conversations between Isabel and Dr. Henry about other plans." "What kind of plans?" Dr. Montgomery asked. Edward hesitated, realizing the gravity of what he was about to reveal. "Plans related to my first wife and my company." Dr. Henry suddenly headed for the room's window, as if looking for an escape route. His breathing was rapid and his hands were trembling visibly. "Henry," Dr. Montgomery said with authority, "I need you to remain calm and cooperate with the investigation." "Investigation?" Dr. Henry repeated, his voice rising in pitch. "Richard, we've been colleagues for years. You really believe the fantasies of a traumatized child?" Luna stood protectively beside Michael. "They aren't fantasies. I saw it. I heard it. They were trying to make Michael sleep forever." Dr. Montgomery observed the interaction between Luna and Michael, noting the genuine affection between the two children. "Luna, you said you heard conversations between Mrs. Sterling and Dr. Henry. Can you tell me exactly what you heard?" Luna took a deep breath and, with the courage she had shown all afternoon, began to report in detail the conversations she had witnessed while hidden in the garden of the Sterling mansion. As Luna spoke, Isabel grew increasingly pale. When the girl mentioned the discussions about property transfer papers and comments about natural accidents, Isabel finally lost her composure completely. "Enough!" she screamed, interrupting Luna. "I'm not going to stay here listening to any more of these lies." She lunged toward the door, but the guards detained her. It was then that something fell from Isabel's purse during the struggle, a yellow envelope that burst open, scattering papers across the floor. Edward bent down to pick up the papers and felt his heart stop when he read the headers. They were property transfer documents, already filled out and awaiting only his signature, which would transfer all of Sterling Developments into Isabel Sterling's name. Dr. Montgomery examined the documents over Edward's shoulder. "Are these documents dated today?" Edward nodded, his voice failing with emotion. "She was waiting for Michael to die today to make me sign these papers." It was then that Michael, with a strength that surprised everyone, managed to sit up in bed and speak with total clarity for the first time. "Dad, she isn't who you think she is." Michael's words echoed through the room with devastating clarity. Edward looked at his son, then at the papers in his hands, and finally at Isabel, who was now being restrained by the guards. The full reality of what had happened began to form in his mind, like a macabre puzzle finally completing itself. "Michael," Edward said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you're able to speak normally." Michael nodded, his eyes now completely clear and focused. "Dad, I remember everything. The last few months, the conversations they had when they thought I was sleeping, how I felt worse and worse after the medicines." Dr. Montgomery approached the bed, genuinely impressed by the boy's rapid recovery. "Michael, from a medical standpoint, your recovery is extraordinary. Coma patients for 3 weeks usually take days or weeks to regain full lucidity." "Because he was never really in a coma," Luna said with the wisdom she had shown all afternoon. "He was being drugged to look like he was in a coma." Dr. Henry, who had remained silent, watching his conspiracy crumble, finally spoke. "Edward, we can still resolve this. It doesn't need to reach the authorities. We can make a deal." Edward turned to his old friend with an expression of total disgust. "A deal? Henry, you were slowly killing my son. What kind of deal do you think I would make with murderers?" The word murderers made Isabel struggle even more against the guards. "I'm not a murderer. I never killed anyone." "No," Michael said, his voice gaining strength. "Isabel, I heard you telling Dr. Henry about how you made my mum's car have the accident. You said it was easy to mess with the brakes." The silence that followed was absolute. Edward felt as if the world had stopped spinning. His first wife, Michael's mother, had been murdered. It hadn't been an accident. "No," Edward whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. She couldn't have. "Dad," Michael continued, tears streaming down his face, "she said she planned everything. That you were a target from the beginning. That she needed to get rid of Mommy to have access to you and your money." Dr. Montgomery immediately picked up his phone. "I need to call the police right now. We are dealing with a situation that goes far beyond medical issues." Isabel began to scream, completely losing control. "Michael is making it up. He's confused. Children make up stories." "I'm not making it up," Michael said with a surprising calm for an 8-year-old. "I remember every word. You also said that when I died, you were going to pretend to be devastated to console my father, and then you were going to make him sign papers transferring everything to your name." Luna approached Michael and held his hand. "You were very brave keeping that information, Michael. You knew that one day you would be able to tell the truth." Edward approached the bed and hugged his son carefully, feeling a mixture of relief and fury he had never experienced. "Michael, forgive me for not realizing what was happening, for letting these people hurt you." "Dad, you didn't know," Michael replied, returning the hug. "They were very good at hiding the truth, but Luna helped me have hope. She always said you were going to find out." Dr. Montgomery, who had been speaking low on the phone, approached the group. "The police are on their way, as is a toxicology team to analyze the vial and perform full blood tests on Michael." Dr. Henry tried one last desperate strategy. "Richard, you've known me for 15 years. Do you really believe I would be capable of this?" "Henry," Dr. Montgomery replied coldly, "after what I heard here today, I don't know who you really are anymore." In the next few minutes, the room filled with activity. Police officers arrived and began asking formal questions. Lab technicians collected samples from the vial and Michael's blood. A social worker was called to look after Luna during the process. Edward observed everything with a surreal feeling. In a matter of hours, his life had been completely transformed. He had discovered his wife was a murderer, that his best friend was her accomplice, and that a brave 9-year-old child had saved not only his son's life, but probably his own. "Mr. Sterling," one of the officers approached, "we need a formal statement from you and your son. We will also need the girl to be heard in the presence of the social worker." "Of course," Edward agreed, "but I want guarantees that Luna will be safe. She saved my son's life." The social worker, a kind middle-aged woman named Catherine, approached Luna. "Luna, you're going to be fine. We're going to take care of everything." Luna looked at Edward with an expression that mixed fear and hope. "Mr. Sterling, after all this is over, will I have to go back to the home?" Edward knelt to be at the girl's eye level, his hands gently touching her shoulders. "Luna, you saved Michael's life. You saved my life. If you want, and if the social worker agrees, I would like you to come live with us forever." Luna's eyes filled with tears. "For real, for real," Michael said from the bed, his face lighting up with a smile. "Luna, you would be my sister." Edward looked at Catherine, the social worker. "What would the process be for adoption?" Catherine smiled. "Mr. Sterling, considering the circumstances and what this girl did, I'm sure we can expedite the process. Luna, what do you think of that idea?" Luna couldn't speak. She only nodded vigorously as tears of joy streamed down her face. Meanwhile, Isabel and Dr. Henry were being led away by the police. Isabel screamed her innocence until the end, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Henry went in silence, apparently accepting that his life as he knew it was over. In the weeks that followed, toxicological analysis confirmed that Michael had been systematically poisoned with a combination of sedatives and substances that simulated symptoms of blood diseases. The investigation into Michael's supposed medical condition revealed it had never existed. All tests had been forged by Dr. Henry. The investigation into the accident of Edward's first wife was reopened, and evidence was found confirming that the car's brakes had been sabotaged. Isabel and Dr. Henry were formally charged with attempted murder, fraud, and in Isabel's case, first-degree murder. 6 months later, Edward was in his living room, watching Michael and Luna play in the garden. Michael had recovered completely, with no lasting effects from the poisoning. Luna had integrated perfectly into the family. her courage and determination translating into academic excellence and a caring personality that brought light to that house that had been dark for so long. "Dad!" Michael came running into the room. "Luna is teaching me how to climb the tree in the backyard." Edward smiled, remembering how Luna had climbed the hospital wall to save his son. "Just be careful, you two." "We always are," Luna said, entering the room and approaching Edward. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Luna, and you don't have to call me Mr. Sterling anymore. You can call me Dad if you like." Luna smiled shyly. "Dad, do you think Michael's mommy would be proud of me?" Edward felt tears forming in his eyes. "Luna, I'm sure she would be not only proud but eternally grateful. You saved her son. You saved our family." Luna hugged him tight, and Edward realized that finally his home was complete again. Not in the way he had planned, but in the way it was destined to be. Outside, the children went back to playing, their laughter echoing through the garden where it had all begun months before, when a ball had fallen by chance and created a friendship that would save 2 lives and create a new family. Edward watched his children, because now Luna was his daughter in every sense, and knew that, despite all the pain and betrayal they had faced, they had found something much more precious. A true family built not just by blood but by love, courage, and loyalty. The story that had begun with despair and almost ended in tragedy had transformed into a new beginning, proving that sometimes the greatest blessings come through the greatest storms.